So welcome everybody to this digital deep dives. It's Digital Europe's discussion forum where we bring together great stakeholders with knowledge on certain topics. And today this is all about the Data Act and how we can make the data economy succeed. So we have Vesterberg says we want to create a solid and fair data-driven economy. We have Monsieur Breton saying an important step is unlocking a wealth of industrial data in Europe. So both very true statements. We know that there are many companies that are not yet sharing data. We also know that there are very successful companies that does share data. And we know that companies that are digitalized have a profit that is up until 2.6 times bigger than non-digital enterprises. So there is a lot of wealth there, not only in innovation, money-wise, in growth-wise, but also really driving new solutions. However, of course, for me, we cannot force this. We cannot force companies, for example, that has worked on big innovations in health or in environmental solutions to just share their data with other enterprises. Think of the most great enterprise from your country or whoever that is, wherever that is, and go to them and force them to share data. So my big question is, how do we make sure that the Data Act succeed in reaching this target, that it really boosts innovation and makes us the place that treats data with care, but still innovates and become the most competitive continent in the world. Let's look at the next slide, please. So a bit of facts here. So the data economy represented 3% of the EU 25 GDP. And we set a target in 2020 saying this should be at least 6% by 2025. Still a very long way to go. So somehow, until now, we didn't get it right. I want to mention a figure here also that has huge influence. Only 8% of SMEs trade across one European border. So somehow there is a big fragmentation factor that also hampers this sharing of data, using, innovating, and not least, companies to grow and prosper in Europe. So if we look at how many companies are using data, only 12% of SMEs are using data for big analytics. That's not a lot if you want to innovate on it, right? The rest are simply not using data at all. In 2025, we have set a target that this should be 50%. Wow, I mean, this is a big increase. So somehow, whatever we do now, need to facilitate and tell those SMEs, I'm going to share my data because I have the money. It's not very cumbersome. It's very easy for me. I can easily share my data, and I don't need 10 lawyers on the bench to tell me the how. And it needs to facilitate the growth across border, where these companies can grow across the European borders. Let's look at the next slide. So today, the data economy is worth 450 billion euros. And if we succeed, it's estimated to be around 1,000 billion. And if we fail, 700. So I say already now, there will be an increase no matter what we do. So what we are dealing with here is the last, how do we get the potential out of the last 300 billion? We will still have a huge growth, but we need to accelerate that growth exponentially to keep up with innovation and keep up with growth of companies. So how can we reach that goal? What exactly are the mechanisms that will make those companies share their data, or, the companies share the data with the governments? There is a lot of great stuff in the Data Act, definitely. I mean, if there are proposals of SMEs, kind of voluntary contract clauses for them to be sure that they can share the data and know how, I think that's an accelerator. But maybe there are also things that are not necessary, like mandatory sharing of data for all entities. I don't think so. Should businesses share their data with governments? I mean, COVID showed that, right? I think we saw that. But in what cases, and are we clear that, you know, some countries might have more rule of law than others, and how do we make sure that there's still a reasonable scope when we do this? So a lot of unclarified questions. Are we once again trying to just say, okay, there are some companies that might hold a lot of data and they should share them? Well, we already discussed that in the GMA. So my big question is, how will we make sure that companies that have less resources and maybe today is not innovating with data, share their data voluntarily when they are businesses, that we have a reasonable scope of doing this? And what are the accelerators? How do we do this wisely in Europe, in an international context where we are also working in a global environment? So with that, let me introduce you to our great speakers of today. We have the honor of having, I think, maybe one of the coolest panels I've seen for a long on data. We have Aurélie, who is the Chief Data Officer Group from Schneider Electric. Thank you so much for coming. I've been working with Schneider, and I know that you are really big on green, everything that has to do with green data, everything that has to do with energy efficiency, etc. We have Damian, sorry for not pronouncing all your surnames, MEP, but also the Data Act Shadow Rapporteur of the European Parliament of the ITRE Committee. Thank you so much for coming, Damian. We have Nathalie, Senior Vice President and Head of European and NATO Affairs from Airbus. And we have Sicco, who is the Senior Director for Research and Innovations from Siemens. Also, again, a company that really knows their drill on data. We have Florence, who is the Deputy Director and Head of International and European Affairs from the French Data Protection Authority, the CNIL. Thank you so much. I think you also have a lot of insight on the GDPR that is super necessary for us to get this right. Then we have Richard from the Deputy Director from the Digital Society Division from the Swedish Ministry of Infrastructure, and of course, the next presidency. And we have Ivo, who is the Director of DD Connect of the European Commission. Welcome so much. And with that, let me pass over to Alberto, who will facilitate the panel and come back for the closing remarks. Thank you so much for coming. And let's have a very good and open discussion.
Thanks a lot, Cecilia, for this great introduction and overview. We have, as you said, a very dense panel with great speakers, and we have roughly an hour for discussion. So we've asked all the speakers to be as brief and interactive as possible, and we'll bring in also the audience for questions at some point. So let's get going. And Ivo, you know the rules. You're going to have to go first because you represent the commission. You're the director for data, and in Connect, you are the author, let's say, of the proposal. So I think to set the scene, what I'm going to ask you is, to give the audience an overview of the commission's thinking, of the problems that the proposal aims to tackle, what sort of vision for the digital economy this proposal aims to generate. And also maybe from what you've seen already from the discussions, how you feel that this has been seen by policymakers so far.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto, and many thanks to Cecilia also, and thanks for the invitation to speak here about the Data Act. Now, first, data. It's very high on the political agenda at the moment. That was different 20 years ago, but there's very good reasons for that. The coming waves of innovation will be based on data, and as Cecilia mentioned it, data is essential for the competitiveness of all companies across the board. And of course, there is the societal impact. It will help us to live longer, healthier lives and to reduce our energy consumption, for example. That's why we have the data strategy that came out in 2020. And there is a vision behind that data strategy. I think it's relevant in this context. We would like data to flow between member states and between sectors. First pillar, very important. We would like more data to be available for use and reuse. Thirdly, data should be used and accessed fully in line with European values and rules. That includes privacy. Data protection very important there. And then there should be clear rules about who can access and use what data and which circumstances. And it's not clear at the moment. It's one of the problems that we're tackling with the Data Act. Now, the strategy, the data strategy, is not just about legislation. This is not just about churning out laws. It's a combination of legislative measures with funding and non-legislative measures, including the investments in data infrastructures and all the work we are doing on common European data spaces to make things work in practice. It's really important to see this as a package. Okay, now about the legislative framework. We indeed want to enable data sharing, use and access of data for more actors, and increasing overall the value creation from data. Cecilia's slide showed that there may be a difference of 300 billion euros a year in 2030. That's not pocket money that we're talking about. Now, what we did with the Data Governance Act, the first big block under the data strategy, is strengthening trust among actors to increase voluntary data sharing. Now, what we're trying to do with the Data Act is a fair allocation of value in the data economy. It's about increasing the availability and usability of data in different contexts. Now, of course, we need to get the balance right. We must make sure that there are incentives to invest in data technologies that are not taken away, but at the same time, we want to open up data for new actors. And the big question there is, again, who has access to what data under which conditions? And we try to provide more clarity across sectors on this question. And actually, we are tackling issues that come across in all the different sectors. Like, well, I bought this product, right? And I thought that the data that come with the products are all mine. Is that true? Who can actually do what with the data? So also in terms of the framing, I would like to shift away a bit from what Cecilia said. This is not about compulsory data sharing. This is about people who buy an object and actually generate data with the object and think that they can use the data. And perhaps others can also use the data, and things are not clear at the moment. So that's what we're doing in the Data Act around IoT data. We want to increase the use of IoT data by clarifying who can do what with the data. At the same time, we are addressing contractual imbalances of negotiation power. So it's unacceptable contract clauses about data sharing. We want to facilitate the access to data in exceptional situations, only in exceptional situations, for the public sector to take better decisions. We make it easier to switch between cloud services because there are blockages that have been noted already years ago and things are not changing. And then finally, we want to improve interoperability of data. It was a clear message we got in the DGA discussion, Data Governance Act discussion from both Parliament and a number of member states. You have to do more on that. So at the end of the day, we want to enable more innovation, empower especially SMEs to give more data to the data poor, not more data to the data rich already. So more opportunities for data-related business models for all actors. And this is about growing the cake. In order to grow the cake, there must be clarity about who can do what with data. A final comment about the international level. At a global level, the data strategy indicates that we as Europe are open, but assertive, right? It's two important facets of the international strand on data. Now, the last point is about the need to act and the need to act fast and quickly. This is really a key moment to shape the data economy of tomorrow with all the industrial data that is coming. And we should not miss the boat there because industrial data is going to play an essential role. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks a lot, Ivo. It was a very, very great overview of the different parts of the proposal. And it's quite clear that there's a lot in the proposal, and it's made of different moving parts, if I can call them that. So I probably want to ask Richard next. Richard Vesterberg, who's Deputy Director for the Digital Society Division at the Swedish Ministry of Infrastructure, so the upcoming presidency of the EU. Looking at the various parts of this proposal, where do you see more opportunities, and where do you see some of the sticking points, some of the potential problems that you'll need to fix in the negotiations? So the potential risks of the proposal that you can identify so far.
Well, thanks a lot, Alberto, and thanks for having the opportunity to participate in this very important panel. Let me start by picking up some of the last items that Eva Wollman picked up, that if we do it the right way, we see it from a Swedish perspective that the Data Act can be an excellent opportunity for Europe to lead the way in a novel use to regulate data and set a global standard if we do it the right way. That's sort of our point of departure in this. And to be concrete and to sort of have a foundation in sectoral experiences, that coming from Sweden, we have a strong telecom industry. And the case of data sharing can be illustrated by the telecommunications market developments in the 1980s and 90s. There we saw that rules for connecting people changed, facilitating and making it possible for different operators and consumers to phone each other easily. And what I'm talking about is, of course, the GSM standard development. And this was adopted to enable interoperability. As Ivo mentioned, a very important aspect is interoperability and the sharing of data and databases with subscribers and guests of networks. Perhaps a similar transformation could be made with the present data economy, so sort of as my Finnish colleagues sometimes say, a GSM moment for Europe, setting a global standard. A second illustration, which is key, not least for myself, since I have the green and digital transition on my desk, is the automotive sector. For instance, a car manufacturer could be required to allow access to data generated during the use of a car. And the user of the car could benefit from some of this data if it's ported when choosing, for instance, a car maintenance service provider. And as we witness in the automotive sector, data is already transforming this very important business. And I think that Swedish and other OEMs in the automotive sector already talk of its business as more or less a software and data business, and not just steel on wheels. But to sum up things, to make this happen in a good way, one part of the recipe could be that companies need to be engaged and on track, providing input for this set of rules and improving quality. And the more involvement you see from business, the greater the likelihood is that the rules can set a new gold standard for data quality, for data sharing. But there are, of course, challenges, Alberto, as you mentioned in your questions, that can we be sure, how can we be sure that the right to use data and the values created in data is fairly distributed or fairly allocated, more correctly, in a balanced way, both for public interest and in the individual's interest? And how can we mobilize industry and companies from small ones to the big ones? I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. I think we'll conclude the list of institutional speakers. So I'll move to Damian now. And there have been already quite a lot of discussions in the Parliament. And when it comes to understanding opportunities and risks, and more in general, anything about the proposal, obviously the issue of scope is the first one you look at. There seems to be a level of discussions about what exactly is included in the obligations, what sort of actors are included, how do we define the different roles in the proposal. So maybe I'm going to ask you how you're looking at this issue in particular, and if you want to expand on any other topic that right now in the discussions you feel are particularly fruitful. in the negotiations in the parliament.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alberto. I would have almost liked to speak at the end because it's always interesting to obviously listen to all the business representatives as well to understand what their issues and thoughts are. But I very much liked Cecilia's introduction of saying, like, look, currently our data market is insufficient, and Ivo has also outlined this, and we need to somehow get to a data market which is actually functioning. So for me, the question is always, what is a data market and how do we create the incentives to actually make it a reality? And here, I think, one word has been mentioned by some of the previous speakers, which is clarity. And so as an SME, especially as a smaller company, you need clarity, what kind of data you can share. And that has to be somehow connecting to, what kind of devices you own. And so for me, the first thing is to make sure that whatever proposal we come up with has legal and maybe also financial clarity. So legal clarity means I know if I buy a connected product, what kind of data I can share with the open markets, let's say actual data markets, which data I can share easily without needing lawyers. And for that, I think some clarifications are still needed in the proposal that the Commission made, in the sense of, and you mentioned this about the scope, what kind of data are we actually regulating? And here I would say, for example, it would make sense to go to transmitted data. And what kind of rights are still connected to this data that is then transmitted out of my connected device once I own it. And here I think more clarity is key. If we go in the direction of transmitted data, for example, then maybe when it comes to the non-compete clauses and so on, we can take a step back because it's not as, if you want, as sensitive. And so for me, this legal clarity is the first point, because if I have the legal clarity, then I can get to potential financial incentives. And that's the second clarity, financial clarity. If I know that I have the right to share this data and to potentially monetize it, and very importantly, here I talk about non-personal data, industrial data. If I have that right as an SME to share that industrial data, then I will have the clarity and the financial incentive to actually, take one of my programmers, which are very rare, and ask them to create an API or whatever with a data marketplace, and also data intermediary, as we have defined them in the Data Governance Act, and to actually put that there and to earn some money with that. So for me, the clarity on legal and financial level, and also on what kind of data we are talking about is absolutely key. And then if you look into the law, that has a couple of applications. We need to more clearly differentiate between the manufacturer obligations, so clarity for the manufacturer, what kind of obligations do they have, and the service provider, what kind of obligations does a service provider of my connected product have for me? And maybe I have many service providers and we call them data holders in the law, and that's completely fine, we can use this term, but these are service providers over a period of time on my connected product. So what kind of rights do they have when it comes to monetization of this data, and what kind of right do I have? So overall, I think it's good to take a step back and not only think about consumer markets, but to think about B2B markets, actual B2B markets, about how we can, really create this functioning, and this has to be the vision, functioning data markets, which will allow for innovation of new products, of new algorithms that new companies come up with, for competition, and for actually an interest for even the smallest business to put data on these data markets. So that would be, for me, the absolute key. And I think then we can get to these liquid data markets and really, create clarity for all of the businesses out there.
Thanks a lot, Damian. I take good note of the fact that you wanted to speak last. So for the second round of questions, I'll ask you the question last, so that you can also benefit from what others have said. But that was a great contribution to the panel already. And I also noticed that you stressed non-personal data when you were speaking. So this is the time for me to bring in Florence Raynal, who is Deputy Director and Head of International and European Affairs at CNIL. And maybe I can, you let me know if this is too much, but I can probably call you one of the minds behind the GDPR, one of the authors of the GDPR, definitely. There is this important aspect of the relationship between Data Act and personal data and protection of personal data. And there was a joint opinion from the EDPB, EDPS last May, which I think it's fair to say was critical of the proposal in many respects, in terms of the need to clarify exactly where the interdependencies, the overlaps, and the potential gaps are. How do you see that very, very complicated, it's fair to say from the outside, relationship? Where do you think are the main issues so far and possible solutions?
Thank you very much to Digital Europe for this invitation. I'm very honored to be with you today. So yes, indeed, we have issued an opinion at the EDPB level, so the European Data Protection Board, composed of all data protection authorities in Europe and also of the EDPS. Yes, we are carefully following the implementation of the EU strategy on data, and really welcome the efforts made in favor of developing this EU digital sovereignty. The proposal will likely have a positive impact by allowing greater data circulation that can be used for important common values such as climate change, science, so research, so very positive objectives. And we think also that the enhancement of the right to data portability is a positive step that gives much more control to data subject, to individuals on the use of their data. Nevertheless, we call also in this opinion that the protection of individuals' fundamental rights and freedom must remain a key pillar of all future EU legislation on digital economy, including the Data Act. And in that regard, yes, we have expressed some concerns because, in fact, as other speakers already touched it upon, it applies to a very broad range of products and services linked to Internet of Things, and some of them may process very sensitive data, such as health data. And so this is why we think that additional safeguard may be necessary to maintain the right level of protection for privacy and data protection. So let me give you a few examples. Don't have a lot of time, so a few examples of things that we think should be improved, and it has been already done. For example, at the Parliament level. So we are also thanking co-legislator to that they have taken on board some of our comments, and it's going in the right direction. So thank you for that. For example, so the new right to access, use, and share data. We think that the definition of user in the proposal is not necessarily very clear and includes legal persons, not only individuals. Therefore, it's important to really clarify, as you said, you talk about a lot of clarity. So to clarify between different situations that may happen where the user is an individual and where the user is not an individual. In that case, the GDPR might apply in some cases, especially when the user is an individual. And so we need to make sure that there is a good connection, good interaction between the rules of the GDPR in that case. So that's one of the examples. So in terms of definition, to be very clear about who is subject to the rules. Secondly, we have also some concern about the Chapter 5 on the obligation to make data available to public sectors and union institutions. And about lawfulness, necessity, and proportionality, we think that we need to be a little bit more precise, more stringent on the hypothesis of emergence or exceptional needs. And I think one of the speakers already talked about it. So we need to be, to be very clear and not to be too broad about the specific type of exceptional needs. We think also that, we are worried also about risk of operational difficulties that might result from the governance architecture, and notably the complexity and confusion that it may brought for data subject and companies. Competence must be clarified between DPAs, data protection authorities, sectoral authorities, coordinating competent authority at national level. And also we think that the EU consistency should be much more reinforced. I will stop there because I know that we don't have much time. I think we will have another opportunity to intervene, and I will maybe develop there a little bit more our point of view on this governance aspect that we think is very, very important. So I will, if you allow me, I will elaborate a little bit more on this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florence. So now, having heard from all our institutional speakers, we're going to move to the industry section of our panel, if you will, because we have, I think, great experience that can be shared from some of our corporate members. And first, we have Aurélie Bergugnat from Schneider Electric. Schneider is one of those companies that has extensive experience in the IoT space. And as Cecilia was saying, particularly when it comes to energy, so energy management, industrial automation use cases. For example, your exchange platform. So as this sort of very well-developed industrial player in the data sharing space, how do you look at the proposal in terms of how does it compare to your best practice so far, what you've been doing? How does it build on it or potentially act in some parts against it?
Hi, Alberto. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of Schneider Electric. For Schneider Electric, of course, we are in favor of any regulation that promotes innovation, and specifically when it fosters outcomes that are sustainable. We do think that the success of green and digital transition to our society, that our society are ongoing right now, will be successful with the contribution of industries, but also regulators. And we do think as well that having product and service users in control of their data, which is done in a way which is trustable, it's exactly what the market overall needs to enter to opportunities and virtuous cycle of having data sharing. What we have done with the exchange platform was exactly in this mindset. So trying to have a platform where we have different parties who can meet and share their data openly to drive more opportunities, either for product deployment, but also for business opportunities, etc., etc. But the thing is, like, these open opportunities will depend on the play that the industry in general and the regulator will drive together. We consider that Schneider Electric will benefit from the Act by not only sharing data, but also receiving data as a third party. And a bigger pool of data will help enhance efficiency of our products, of innovation, and hence globally the increase of data liquidity. Therefore, to have data sharing, you need to have trust in what you share, and to build trust, we need to have interoperability standards that are not effective yet. So one of the big interdependency with the success of the Data Act is having this standard about interoperability. What does it mean globally for the industry and the regulator is defining quite clearly what is the scope of data to be able, practically speaking, to put these interoperability standards. So that's the first point. We are a little bit concerned to push the regulation around data that we are supporting, of course, without really having standards of interoperability that will support collectively the industry, the regulators, and any stakeholders involving in this data sharing approach. So that's the first thing. And when we look at the Data Act right now, the transition period of 12 months seems to be very aggressive to put in order the scope, the interoperability standards and the establishment of the execution of the Data Act. So by principle, directionally, we are completely supportive. We foresee certain interdependency that might be tricky to put in place. As a consequence, we do think that we might have two main consequences. One on the talent pool, because with the complexity, as mentioned by Florence and also mentioned with Cecilia, if we want to have a kind of virtuous cycle in the data sharing, the complexity for international companies like us, but not only us, to interoperate the data regulation that we have around the world will really drive a certain talent pool in big corporation, and will probably be something which will be put SMEs at risk as well. So that's one thing that we want to really highlight on that one. The second thing as well, the complexity of the different data regulation that we have collectively. We need also to make sure that these are not coming in conflicts with trading agreements that we have. So we need absolutely to have a certain consistency with the data regulation that are in flight right now with the trading agreements. And by extension, to maintain this consistency, we need to look at trading agreements to extend not only for goods, but also for digital. So if I want to summarize a little bit our positioning, we do think that there's a strong opportunity to really break down the data ownership. To make it happen, we need to make sure that we push this notion of interoperability standards. To make it happen, we need to make sure that the timing is adequate to make it happen properly. And then we need to look for the third point, we need to look at the consistency of a trading agreement with the Data Act and over regulation around data.
Thank you, Aurélie. Next, I'm going to go to Nathalie from Airbus. And I'm going to ask you a very similar question in the sense that Airbus, like Schneider, has been a data sharing champion for quite some time, a different industry. You are a central pillar of aviation, as we know. Notably, you have the Skywise platform, where there's all sorts of operational data, engineering data, and flight data that is shared among the different parties in the aviation ecosystem. So how do you look at the Data Act vis-a-vis what you have been doing already in your industry? How do you look at the provisions, and what does it look like in terms of how it will impact your operations going forward?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. Indeed, I will try to explain where we are in terms of data sharing generated by our products, the commercial aircraft. And then I will look at how we read the Data Act in that perspective. As a reminder, I will start to say that a plane is made of 1 million to 2 million parts. And that you have thousands of sensors across the aircraft. So this is an extremely automated product, and this is an extremely regulated product as well, for safety reasons, of course. And as you mentioned, Alberto, we decided a few years ago to invest in a platform called Skywise to enable the digital transformation of the sector. It is used by Airbus to develop its digital solution, but as well, it is shared to enable the digital solutions of customers and shared with suppliers as well. I think it's important to answer your question. You need to understand which type of data our aircraft are generated, because this is the level of granularity which enables to answer your question. So bear with me for 1 minute on this type of data. First, we have to be compliant with air safety rules, and massive amounts of data already are made accessible to airlines in an open manner. These data are always fully available to airlines without any restriction and at virtually no cost. Our customers, by the way, often do not use the full extent of such open and already available data, according to our information, most of them will use a third or half of it. So we see already here there's a potential of expansion with the current data sharing. And it's important to note as well that these data are made available to Airbus only if the airlines agree with it. But of course, we go beyond the safety rules and we can collect and exploit more data upon demand of the airline, once again, and therefore with their agreement. But this time we're going to invest money and we are going to obviously need some protection in the intellectual property we're going to put in that investment and innovation. It is a very emerging market. According to our information, less than 5% of our customers' airlines have requested to use such additional data. And then the last bucket of data are the design data. As I said, an aircraft is composed of numerous components, equipment, and systems. And design data refers to the neuronal connections between all equipment and the onboard computer. They actually reveal how the aircraft effectively functions and its internal structure and design. So this is why it's very sensitive, as you can imagine, because the computer contains all key information about the design of the aircraft, how the various equipments interplay, and how it should operate. This is the DNA of our aircraft, and it's important to understand that this DNA is different for an Airbus aircraft, a Boeing aircraft, or a Comac aircraft. So how do we look at the Data Act in that perspective? First, as all the speakers pointed out, we fully support the underlying objective. We think that more data sharing is good for the EU economy and, of course, for the EU data economy. Nevertheless, it's a sharp downturn from traditional voluntary data sharing, and it's a complex topic. So we need to take our time. As Ivo said, we need to find the right balance in terms of parameter, because we need as well to preserve the core of our EU products and innovation. And without EU competitive products, EU will not have a vivid data economy in the long run. So this is this balance that indeed we need to collectively find. And in the Data Act, as it is written today, we are concerned about the protection of our intellectual property and product design data. We think that the EU legislation should help protect the open space industry for the long term. On IP topic, this is straightforward, but it needs to be clearly written in the regulation. There are some hints, but we think that we would benefit in a clearer definitions. As far as design data are concerned, in our opinion, it's pretty straightforward as well. They cannot be shared, even with users, because the risk of leak would be too high and the impact too serious in terms of retro-engineering, competition, and copying by competitors. So here we are extremely careful with the approach, and that's a very important point for us. So if I conclude, we absolutely support the underlying objective of the Data Act, and we agree with the text in a lot of topics. I will point out the fact that we agree that in any event, the manufacturer cannot give access to data which are not available to him in the first place, of course, and that significantly processed data are not anymore generated by the products and that therefore are out of scope. But nevertheless, even if we can continue to work to explore more data sharing, today only less than 5% of our customers are interested. So we need to take that into account, and all the evolution cannot be free for the users. We bear cost to collect and prepare this data, and that needs to be taken into account. So this is the balance you were talking about. And last but not least, in any case, some data cannot be shared even with our customers, data that are IP protected and data that reveal too much about the design of our products, i.e. its DNA. Even with safeguard, the risk of leak and uncontrolled dissemination would be huge, And this would open, as I said, the gates to engineering and copying by our non-EU competitors. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Nathalie, for that perspective from Airbus. Now we have Sicco from Siemens. You heard from both Aurélie and Nathalie about their own challenges from a company perspective, and clearly Siemens is also a major industrial player and a central pillar of the industrial ecosystem that's already sharing data. And you are responsible, you're a senior director for research and innovation policy at Siemens. So we know that there's a lot of objectives, as Ivo said, that the Data Act aims to achieve. Fair access to data, generating more innovation in the data economy is certainly one central objective of the proposal. How do you look at innovation specifically and how it is enabled by this proposal? And I think we also heard from Aurélie, Nathalie, there was quite a lot of stress on protection of IP, trade secrets, and the like. So where do you see that balance when you look at the proposal from the Commission? What's it achieving that's good in terms of promoting innovation, and where it doesn't need to look in terms of fixing potential issues with the proposal?
Yeah, thank you, Alberto, for this excellent question, and hello to everybody. I think it's really an important point to see that the Data Act really tries to achieve a goal that we totally are fine with and that we really want to support in our daily business, because we see a huge potential in using industrial data, be it in factories, be it in the energy grid, be it in the mobility system, or in smart cities and smart buildings we are as Siemens active in. So I think there's actually a huge potential from data to support our competitiveness in Europe in the industrial sector, and also to reach the environmental goals and the sustainability goals that we have set as goals in Europe. I think therefore the data usage in industrial applications is key. So everything that fosters and helps to use data and to make value out of data is very highly appreciated. Let me make 3 points behind that background. First of all, where do we stand in industrial B2B data sharing? I think we are there in a different stage of maturity than in B2C. I think in B2C, the market is far more developed than in industrial B2B. I would say data economy in industrial B2B applications is still in its childhood. So a lot of companies do not really take investments in order to get to their data, get access to their own data in order to already use them internally. And the next step would then to use it bilaterally or even multilaterally with other companies. There we are in a very early stage in the market. Nevertheless, there are already first promising attempts to do that. And we are, as Siemens, are very active to foster that, especially in cooperation with other companies, be it big companies, but also be it SMEs or startup companies. That's a very big issue. I would be happy to come back to it perhaps in the second round, because this is really, I think, what the future is. This must be these data-based digital innovation ecosystems that we have to build up in Europe. And I think the data spaces can be a very important and very helpful element of that. So nevertheless, we are not still there. So everything is good that helps company to do investments into their data and to try to cooperate with other companies. And also, of course, with research institutions and public institutions. Second point is, how does the Data Act play into that situation? I think for the industrial B2B, there are a lot of assumptions that we are a little concerned because we do not see our reality reflected. And I only want to make one point here today, as time is very short. It's the assumption the Data Act takes in the proposal we all know, that the data holder is the manufacturer. And as Nathalie already pointed out, in many cases, this is not the case in industrial applications. Perhaps there's a difference between B2C and B2B applications. Yeah? But in our industrial applications, in I would say 90%, our customer who bought the IoT device owns, so to say, or has access to the data. And this is very okay, that's fine. Yeah. but this is not reflected in the Data Act. And I would say what is important is that the Data Act really supports the data flow in the whole value network, not only this user-centric approach that looks a little like a one-way street only to the user. In many industry cases, the user already has the data, but the Data Act should help that really also the manufacturer and also even the component provider of a manufactured product can get access to the data, because there are also big innovation potentials the manufacturer or the component provider could use if he gets access to the data. And in many cases today, there is no access. I'm not quite sure whether all this has to be regulated. Up to now, it works quite fine with contracts where you can bilaterally or multilaterally clarify who gets access to which kind of data to which purpose. And I think this is very important to reflect also in the Data Act, that data can flow in all directions. And the last point is we have to support, I think, legal clarity there. I'm very together with what Damian said. I think this is really crucial. This is what we didn't see in the first draft sufficiently enough from our point of view. So we hope that there will be more clarity on what is data, what is a product, what are the roles that come into play. And I think there we should also differentiate between B2C applications where we have power asymmetries in many cases and industrial B2B applications where in many cases we do not see any market failure, we do not see any power asymmetries where we have contractual relations with our partners, with our customers on an eye level. And I hope that the Data Act will support this eye-level data economy in industry, because it's really key for our industrial future in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sicco. So having concluded the first round, I'm going to go back to Ivo, having heard from all our speakers, and I saw you very engaged in the discussion, nodding, taking notes. So this is the time to respond to some of the points that were made. But I think, and Sicco alluded to this, and said it very clearly, actually, that the proposal comes at a time when we still expect that what we're seeing now in terms of data economy is only the beginning, right? Still nascent markets in most cases. And we have a proposal now that's sort of setting the path forward across all these markets. And you were quick to clarify that from your perspective, it's not really mandating access rules, but it's really giving rights to users. So something that should already be in place across the board, that users should have access to their data at the end of the day. But on the other hand, the proposal does require companies, entities, data holders to share data. So it is mandatory certainly from that angle. How do you see that the proposal provides for that balance between, starting to develop more of what is very little now and still allowing for, while having mandatory rules, still allowing for that freedom for those markets to develop?
Yeah, many thanks, Albert. And please allow me to reply first to something you asked me in the first round. It was, how do the negotiations progress, right? How do things go? And I think it's relevant also for the issues that were raised. So we came out in February with the proposal, and I see that the negotiations are going well, generally, both in Parliament and in Council. And what I also see is that the interinstitutional discussions are making the text better. Because when we came out with our proposal, a lot was read into the proposal that was not there. Or actually there were interpretations where we thought, wow, this is absolutely not what we were thinking. So I think that the rounds of clarification and taking away some of the concerns that we heard, that there's real good progress there, and the text is becoming more solid in that sense. Now, okay, on your question, in relation to entrepreneurial freedom, again, what we're trying to do is, on the one hand, give consumers, companies that generate data, more control over the data they generate, but at the same time keep incentives for investments in data collection. That is really a core aspect of the proposal, the balance. I think we got it quite right, but there are things that can be further clarified. Now, each of the chapters is leaving room for market mechanisms to come into play and to actually continue to apply. So what we put on the table with the Data Act is principles-based legislation we knew that as horizontal legislation, we should not try and we cannot actually regulate every single technical detail across the board. So we deliberately chose to leave room for private autonomy to specify the details. Contractual freedom is actually a key aspect of the proposal. For example, on B2B IoT data, right, the business-to-business relations. Now, many of the details between the data holder and the user are left to contract, right? For example, the compensation that is largely based on a market mechanism between larger players. Now, if it's SMEs, they actually get a privileged position, cost-based actually. So that is, well, better than a market mechanism. Contractual fairness. Again, contractual freedom is the norm. What we do in terms of the unfairness test really has a very limited scope, where there are data-related clauses that are unilaterally imposed on smaller players, and that clearly leads to unacceptable situations. So we're putting the SMEs back at the negotiation table in a way in situations where they were not. Again, it's really exceptional situations. For business to government, data sharing, it's a last resort mechanism for exceptional need situations. We've seen the problems in the COVID situation where the public sector could not get the data they needed. And at the same time, companies were flooded with requests for the data and they didn't know how to handle that. That was not a good situation, not a good place to be. So both elements, we're trying to tackle that in the Data Act. Business to government, voluntary corporations remain fully unaffected, right? And here we're talking about exceptional situations where the current mechanisms don't work. What is a normal situation for the public sector to get data? Either you make a law or you buy the data. Now, here we're talking about situations where none of these work. The last point I want to make is about the relation with trade agreements. Aurélie mentioned that. Now, in the Data Act, whatever people may have read into it, there's no localization requirements. The famous Article 27 is about situations where governing bodies from third countries get access to European data against European law when they shouldn't have that kind of access based on unilaterally imposed legislation. It's that kind of situations that we are trying to avoid. And there is no data localization. There is no effect whatsoever on data flows within companies or between the EU and third countries.
Thank you, Ivo, particularly as well for that very last point. And you were very open and about your surprise about the reactions you got on the proposal, because people read into the proposal stuff that you were not expecting. And I think that's a normal part of the process, I think, for all of us, because indeed, you know, the commission may have come at it with a certain angle, but people have started reading the proposal and maybe it's not that clear. And I would argue that article on 27 is one of those articles. And this is where the discussions between council and parliament are particularly important, and the commission, of course, to address any points that are unclear. On this, again, I'm going to go to the parliament. Damian, I think one of and Ivo already mentioned this among the list of things that are being debated now. The business to government data sharing obligations have been one of the aspects of the proposal. I think it's fair to say more heavily criticized from various quarters in terms of you know, how broad they are, what type of public emergencies they refer to. And there's different ways that the parliament has been discussing going about it. So from your perspective, how do you look at business to government mandatory data sharing? Where do you think are the main problems? How would you solve it?
So thanks a lot for throwing the ball to me. As you have been explaining, there's obviously different positions in Parliament, and there's not only different positions from different political groups, but there's also different perspectives from the different committees. So, for example, if you look from a, let's say, data protection perspective of personal data, the committee responsible for that, the Liebe Committee, I think, proposes to completely delete B2G data sharing obligations because they think it's too broad. Yeah? And so that is, I think, a valid position to take. From my perspective, I understand the intention that the Commission has had, and I would say that maybe if we, I'm from industrial policy perspective, think more with the liberal framework, if you want, that we can set. And I think if we can say, look, there's an absolute emergency case like COVID, where we have, the need to transfer certain data from the private sector to the public, and the public sector cannot buy it. And that's, I think, an important part as well, without unreasonable efforts or whatever. Then maybe we can regulate that kind of emergency and give it legal grounds via this act. I think I would be careful with prevention of emergency that gets becomes very far, and also regulating more specific, what we call in German Daseinsvorsorge, like the situation of fulfilling other public service tasks. There, I think what is needed is just a more clear scrutiny on the local, regional, national, or even European level with a specific regulation in that sense. And that's also like what I will propose, or what I have proposed from our position, that to say it quite bluntly, the trust in the state in Helsinki is much higher than potentially even in some parts of Germany and maybe some parts of Eastern Europe. And so I think we should have, if there's a specific need for a specific task that the government cannot fulfill without access to certain data, then let's regulate that even on the European level, if it's very specific, or regional, national, local, wherever that makes sense. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thanks a lot, Damian. With that, I should probably remind our audience that this is Q&A, so it is as well to ask questions. We have a Q&A box where you can add your questions, and we'll ask them of the panel. I want to go to Florence now. And you alluded to this in your brief introductory remarks, but there's this issue. Clearly, one of the key aspects is coordination at European level. What sort of enforcement scenario are we dealing with when it comes to the Data Act? And coming from the experience of data protection authorities, we know that this has been one of the pain points of implementing the GDPR. It's been one of the areas where the DPB in particular has been doing quite a lot of work, and lately we have seen enhanced collaboration and consistency being developed with, if you will, new tools, and all the powers vested in the data protection authorities being used. The Data Act effectively creates a new enforcement mechanism. It is very different from the GDPR, and where do you see that system evolving? How do you see it creating convergence at European level? Also, when it comes to, again, consistency with what is coming out of data protection enforcement.
Yes, thank you very much, Alberto. Yeah, that's true. It's really an issue, and that we have stressed in our opinion very clearly. It's about the governance, and we really think that it should be addressed, because it can create really a lot of confusion and readability, readiness for the individuals at national level, but also for companies, if they are not enough clarity about which authority is competent depending on the issue they are confronted with. We see that there is possible fragmentation also at EU level if we don't have the same way to handle this competency at national level. So I think somebody mentioned consistency and clarity at several times. That's really something that for us is missing in the governance aspect. It's missing again at national level to clarify who is competent for what, but also at EU level, we think that there is the system is not enough clear and will not ensure enough consistency at EU level. So also we think that, as you mentioned, there could be some problem of articulation with the GDPR. There is nothing, no connection with our system, the one-stop shop. There is also no consistency about the way we will handle complaints between different authorities. We need to create a better cooperation between authorities. We may need to think that this coordinating supervisory authority will be in charge of handling complaints and to be like a port of entry for the other. And we need also to think outside of the Data Act of the way we will interact with other authorities competent for other texts, like the DMA or the DSA. For example, interoperability is mentioned in other texts. So we need also to make sure that there will be consistency as well, even if it's not totally the same, of course, the same scope, but we need to avoid to create some confusion also. So more just to summarize, and I think again, consistency is the right way, the right word to use for as well governance, and we definitely think that data protection authorities have a role to play because there will be mixed set of data, personal and industrial, as you said, or other type of data, that there will be some interaction, lot of interaction with the GDPR. And so we think that we should really also use the text to make clear, to clarify this interaction with the GDPR, the prevalence of GDPR when personal data is concerned, and that we have a mix of data, mixed data, and also in terms of competence as well. We need also to clarify the interaction with data protection authorities, and we think that data protection authorities have a role to play also as coordinating competent authorities at national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florence. We're starting to see questions from the audience. Maybe there's a question that I can ask Aurélie and Sicco. I don't know who wants to go first, but there's a specific question about the impact that the Data Act provisions can have in achieving Europe's sustainable and circular objectives. And maybe maybe you can elaborate on how you see this issue potentially being addressed in the current proposal vis-a-vis what's already been done by industry. And then there's a lot of questions for Ivo and Damian, so I'll keep those for later.
Okay, I will share the perspective of Schneider Electric regarding from what could contribute to sustainability and circular economy with data. Already today, and it's very transversal to any regulation, because of the market is asking us that, because it's also the positioning of Schneider Electric. There's a number of environmental data, circular economy data that for our entire portfolio that we are building and sharing freely with our partners, our customer, or any kind of partners, and are available in the different platforms that we let available to our partners, our customer, etc. Exchange, but also ac.com, etc., where you can find the entire portfolio of Schneider. We have a full assessment with the data of how we can have a specific flows dedicated to circular economy with a strong impact on our supply chain. So that's how we address this kind of thing. So the structuration of the data and the fact to break the data ownership thanks to this kind of regulation with Data Act will really help the overall collaboration on that win-win approach and virtuous cycle that I was mentioning before. That being said, again, to be exchange was one of the first platform of data altruism to be really in a win-win approach, but to make sure that we can have this play efficient for Europe in general and the market and the industry, it needs to come with trust, and trust come with interoperability standards. And that's really something that we need to work collectively on, regulator and industry. Ivo mentioned regarding the international data flow, the impact, the view that has been taken on the Data Act, which is player outside of Europe to Europe. for international company, multinational company like Schneider Electric, international data flow are important in order to provide the best service for our clients. And restriction of data flow and data storage are a reality, not only in Europe, and the trend is accelerating. And we international players have to rely on and support tech players and regulators to come up with something workable workable patterns to make it happen. And because we do foresee that the complexity around that will really block the entry to a smaller player as well. So it will be a little bit counterintuitive to that one. And in the same spirit, there is probably also an opportunity to harmonize an holistic approach to data. Unavoidably, we have substantial pieces of the regulation which is overlapping with GDPR, namely, but and we probably taking the opportunity to rephrase that collectively might ease really the access and really the shareability of the access. On the last point that has been mentioned as well with B2G government sharing, there's probably a strong requirement associated to scope, what are critical data assets for governments, because it's not one size fits all in this situation. So these are the little pieces that I can bring to this panel on that one.
Thanks a lot, Aurélie. I'll come to the questions for Ivo and Damian. And again, you referred to scope again. So for Ivo, we have a question as to the Commission's intentions with the broad scope for the proposal, notably when it comes to the definition of data. Data is defined in very general terms in the original proposal. And then to Damian on the very same point, a lot of people have asked us to clarify more your intentions when it comes to transmitted data. So what do you think is covered by that definition, and how do you think it addresses the scope questions? Ivo first. Yeah, on the definition of data, I don't think the definition of data is actually the determinant factor. We use the definition of data that has been used elsewhere, and actually we come in broadly of what we understand by data. Now there is a different question, which is what are the obligations in relation to what data, right? I think that is more relevant. And there, when we speak about the IoT data, we were thinking of the raw data and prepared data that actually would be covered, but not about data that is has gone through different iterations, has been treated by algorithms to give real added value. I know that Damian is going to disagree with me on that one, but that's was actually what we intended to do. We want to avoid that we just limit ourselves to raw data, pure raw data, and then if there's a small manipulation actually that harmonizes the data, it would no longer be covered by the Data Act. So that should also be covered. But we don't want actually fully processed data to be covered by the obligation to give that out then to third parties, right? And I think that is more relevant than the definition of data itself. Thank you, Ivo. Damian?
Yeah, I mean, Ivo and I have this conversation regularly, so we're very happy to have it here once again. So I think maybe it's good to take a step back again and say, like, okay, what's the reason why we want to do this? Is to, like, yeah, basically alleviate the market fear that insufficient clarity exists, so that insufficient data is shared. So I mean, data sharing means it leaves, you know, your organization and potentially it goes somewhere. So for us, the key incentive here is to monetize that data so that you are willing to share it. So that's let's say like the idea behind it. And now the question is, you know, what kind of data and who is sharing? Yeah. So first of all, in Article 3.1, there's something about a manufacturer obligation, which says as a manufacturer, you should be the one that allows for the user to read out that data. But that has nothing to do with a later data holder situation. It's just basically saying, hey, manufacturers, please make data readable. So that is not transmitted data, that is just in general, like, let's allow whoever owns that device and the connected product to read out as much data as possible. We would say to create at least as much transparency as possible of what kind of data is being created in it. And then you have someone who buys that connected product. And for us, this term of buying is really quite important. And here I would also disagree with Sicco, who said, like, you know, if you're a manufacturer, you should have access. Like, a manufacturer is someone who sells you a connected product, and then he loses all legal rights and entitlements to whatever this product is being used for. So the relationship between me as the owner of that connected product and the manufacturer is done with, you know, the point T in time when I get that and I buy it, and then I buy all the rights that come with that product. So whenever I want, if as a manufacturer I want to get something out of it, I need to create a contract to receive something from it. But as soon as I create that contract with that user, who should be the owner or the person that got the certain data sharing rights or data usage rights from the owner, then I'm a data holder. So I'm not a manufacturer anymore in the capacity, but I become a data holder because I do some form of contractual relationship. So normally a data holder for us is someone who gains access via providing some form of a service to the data that that I, you know, generate by the use of that product. So that's like the legal clarity a bit. And then the question is, okay, now we have the user and the connected product, and then the data holder who's receiving data. What kind of data do we regulate here? And here for us, the idea would be, let's make it very simple and get away from raw and inferred data, which in our view would need a lot more clarification for each product type and service, whatever, what kind of data is meant. And let's go to the point of actually legally and technologically being very certain, which is the data that comes out of my product. So transmitted data, if you want. So that's really like, and transmitted, let's be clear, yeah? That's really like very easy to see, because it leaves one legal entity and enters another one. And for us, you know, to go to that means also that we give the manufacturer a bit more freedom to operate and say, okay, what kind of data will I actually be transmitting? That later on, when I become data holder, I have, you know, then there are certain rights attached to it, and so there's a bit more freedom. We also don't go into all the details of the, you know, the product itself, be it a car or whatever, or windmill, but we just say like the transmitted data. But then we would say the user is at the center of that data market as soon as this happens. So the data holder can have access, can improve their product, and so on. But when it comes to sharing, and that for us is for non-personal data, the monetization of that data that leaves that, you know, device, there should be maximum freedom for the user to actually share it. So that's the balance that I've been trying to talk about. And then I think Aurélie also mentioned, for me, to create very clear certainty, to give the manufacturer a lot of design freedom, but then to say whatever data the data holder receives, you know, the user should be able to direct to different sources to potentially share that on the data markets. Again, with the idea of creating data markets. And here I would say, obviously it's important, you know, to think about how companies can use data within their own premises and so on. This is, I mean, this is the whole digitization journey that we are doing to get from analog business models to fully, you know, AI-driven business models, and that's what's happening. And I don't think that the Data Act actually solves this issue. That's something, you know, where we have to bring more talent to Europe and so on. We can talk about a lot of different things. But what we do is we create an additional incentive to actually go this step from analog to fully digital business model by making it more attractive on a monetary basis to share data outside my own organization. So that's basically the idea. And I do have to say that I think the different industry interests that we look at often here is, you know, between the manufacturers, between the companies which are more like the users and owners of certain products, and then potential data recipients, innovation drivers, startups, and so on. So sorry for the long clarification, but I hope it helped a bit.
Thank you, Damian. I see Aurélie has her hand up. Very quick.
Just to confirm what Damian says somehow and complement, there are technical capabilities and expertise that you need to put in place to benefit completely from this data usage, raw data access, etc., that are massive in terms of investment. which probably could benefit many big corporations and will be a little bit counterintuitive. So it's something that the Data Act today doesn't fix, and probably helping, again, sorry to insist on standards, etc., might really drive a more openness in the data sharing, and moving step by step. But for sure, we still have a lot of opportunities to drive that forward.
Thank you, Aurélie. Nathalie, I've seen your hand, and I'll give you the opportunity to reply just now. I think we don't have a lot of time, so I'll ask one question, possibly two, because I do remember that I promised Damian that he would be the last one to speak. I didn't forget that. So we have one question that I think would be perfect for Nathalie and Sicco. So sharing industrial data requires a trust environment, or at least the possibility to prove that there's trust between the people who are sharing data. And if there's no trust environment, it's very difficult to have, if you will, healthy data sharing that can actually increase the opportunity for business development on all sides. How do you look at this issue? Is the Data Act doing enough there? Is it mandating too much? Should it be more on freedom of contract, protection of trade secrets, and defining among different players how that works? How do you look at this issue? Who wants to go first? Nathalie, because you had your hand up already.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And it boils down to what I wanted to say. I think to create a trustful environment, it's fine to have freedom of contracts and trade secrets for prepared data or for readily available data. But for everything which is linked to the product, and do not forget the product, that would be my main message. Of course, we want the data economy to flourish, but we need as well to look at the consequences in terms of the industrial innovation of the product, because those data are products derived. And on this, for us, it's pretty clear that IPR protected data and design related data should be excluded from the scope of the B2B transfer obligations.
Thanks a lot, Nathalie. Sicco?
Yeah, let me follow up on this and combine it with the question you raised a little earlier on the sustainable use of data, because this is a really crucial point also from our point of view. And there I want to mention the example of Estanium. I don't know whether some of you are already familiar with Estanium. Estanium is an open innovation ecosystem that we have just created together with many other companies, where we try to build up a community that is able to calculate a product carbon footprint, and this behind the background of a true digital product passport. And I think this concept of a digital product passport bears a lot of potential also for additional new business models and value creation. And this is a parallel activity, so to say. It is not covered by the Data Act. It should be well aligned. The regulation parts that address a digital product passport, like the Sustainable Product Initiative, for example. And we see there a huge potential to use this structure of a digital product passport, not only to calculate the CO2 footprint of a product along the entire value chain. As we know, 90% of the CO2 footprint is in the so-called scope 3, so outside the factory that finally produces a product. So there's huge potential for environmental things, but also huge business potential. And this Estanium network is one very good example of a voluntary, incentive-driven community of companies who now try to establish this cooperation along the product value chain. And I think these kind of examples, I could name a lot of more. You know, Siemens has launched its accelerator platform this summer together with many other partner companies. So we really try to work on that topic, and we have first very good examples. And we would like to foster European data economy by these kind of open industrial innovation ecosystems. And they are not good only for business, but also for environmental and sustainable issues. And these two sides of the medal, they actually go together.
Thanks a lot, Sicco. I have one final question. As I said, Damian is going to be the last one to go, but this is also relevant for Richard. I'm not going to ask this question of Ivo, because of course this is his proposal and he's going to tell me that it should be adopted as soon as possible. But Damian, Richard, Having looked at the proposal, having started your discussions apace, and having also listened to our speakers today, it's a very complex proposal. How long do you think it will take you guys to negotiate it and get to a final text? Richard, any?
Thanks. I can go first. I think that we'll have full confidence still for the current presidents. They'll make a very significant impact, and then we'll take it forward with a very ambitious take for this spring. That's as much as I can say, actually, Alberto. Thanks.
Thank you. Damian, you have the last word as promised.
I feel a bit bad because I felt I already said a lot, but thanks a lot for giving me that word. I was actually listening very carefully to Richard, because obviously we are very excited for the Swedish presidency then to take up a lot this file and to push it forward. So very good to hear that this is the ambition. I mean, for us, I think we will also try to be done by spring and with our approach, so that we then can combine basically the member states general approach with ours, and then get into trilogues this summer. I think that would also be Ivo's dream. I hope that we really get started over spring and summer, and then hopefully done next year at some point then.
Perfect, Damian. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm afraid we'll have to conclude this very rich panel. Again, we have great speakers, only 1.5 hours. We had a lot of questions during Q&A, which shows a lot of interest, and unfortunately we weren't able to answer all of them, but hopefully the discussion was very interesting for everybody. And at this point, I'm going to bring back up our Director General, Cecilia. Are you still around?
I am definitely still around. And what do I do now with 3 minutes and 2 pages of notes? So I don't know where to start. I mean, maybe starting with Ivo, I think it's really nice to see the openness of the Commission. You said that we had ideas, and once you send your ideas to other institutions and to stakeholders, and some of what you might have said might have been misinterpreted or seen in a different way, and that the process is really enriching. And why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because we have a lot of technologies now. We have the AI Act, we have the Data Act, things which are like cutting edge in regulation. And I'm not saying that regulators don't know anything about data or AI. I'm just saying that it's difficult, even for industries who are only doing this, to exactly, get hold of how to do this. And I believe that the sandboxing, trying out and really showcasing regulations with the environment, with citizens, but also with NGOs, with organizations like ourselves, really seeing what will the effect be. So now we launch this, what does it actually mean? So a new way of really having even closer and more closeness with industry and with citizens on these digital regulations will be absolutely key. We all talk about values. I still don't know what that exactly means, because European values means something very different from country to country, from different segments. But I do think that we need to be careful not preserving values so much that we lose the value in the end. So let's try to get this right. And I think the travel direction is the same for everybody. They want to boost the data economy, create more innovation, bring down CO2, get better health solutions. And let's make sure that we do that together. So thank you for the openness. Then maybe jump to some of the cases done by Nathalie and Airbus, saying like a lot of our clients, they are not interested yet. They simply don't know what the possibilities are. So this is just the start of the data economy. And we need to educate people on the way to giving more room to a data economy. And of course, we cannot give data for free. We invest in data. We need to also earn money by boosting the economy. And not least, IP is important. Of course, we need to take care of IP. If not, we are giving away the diamonds as businesses to competition, which is of course not the goal of a regulation like this. I heard Aurélie say standards and interoperability. Let's not totally regulate before we know how this will work. It will take time to set, you know, the rules for standards and interoperability to happen in practice. So let's make sure that we have time to do industry-driven standards on how to actually do this. And also Siemens, Sicco said a digital product passport could be a way to actually drive these kind of how will we could be a showcase to start with, where both public and private data sharing will be necessary, but where companies will also be able to use, you know, their data but still preserve their IP. So this might not be a bad showcase on how to test or how to sandbox the regulation. Then I heard Florence saying GDPR, let's make sure that it's coherent. Let's have a governance model that we know that works in practice. I think, as I always say, GDPR is an excellent regulation. It was not easy to implement for the companies, and already now, just in Germany, we have 16 different data protection authorities, and for smaller companies, it's a big burden. I just have to say that. So let's make sure that we know what we are doing and how we work together before we launch it. Damian, more clarity on what kind of data, and I was very impressed by your deep technical knowledge on how we use IoT. Thank you so much for that. I think we will have to tap your brain on that in the future also. More financial clarity for stakeholders, and they need to know if and when they can share the data. I heard Richard saying that this will come to an end in Sweden. I appeal to you to have industry and civil society close. We don't know how this will work in practice, and we will need to practice before. If not, we will put ourselves behind the rest of the world instead of in front of the rest of the world. If we need to deal with a more compliance cost and regulatory burden before we know, so we need to practice the muscles before we use them. So let's make sure that we run ahead as fast as we can, but as slowly as the company and the people who are actually using data today know how to actually implement this. Last but not least, I would like to say that I think it has been an absolutely excellent panel. I have been very impressed by the knowledge. This is exactly what we need when we start discussing this. I still have the big question, and maybe we can meet again and discuss that. How do we make sure that we involve and that we teach all the SMEs how to use these rules before we launch it in the market? So we make sure that we don't slow our economy down, but that we speed it up and make everybody having a smooth transition to a new framework of data regulations. With that, let me say many thank you. And I'm sorry that there's actually a lot of 18 questions that were not answered in the chat. So if I may appeal to of course, my colleagues in Digital Europe to maybe circulate those questions, and for you guys to put a written effort as a panel into answering these great unanswered questions coming from the audience. Because in the end, you know, many brains are wiser than only a few. So thank you so much for this openness and for your participation. And thank you to my team for gathering all these great people to discuss the Data Act.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you for today. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.